So I kind of like talking about movies, not necessarily older movies, but movies that have been out of theater for a while, if they ever were in theater at all. The movies that I will talk about today were from the community tab. Thank you very much for the people that voted. I had four different votes for two movies, and I'm going to review those today. And I kind of want to not necessarily pin them against each other. They're two very different movies, but say which I thought was the better movie. Not the most enjoyable movie, as you will see, but the ones that I feel are better produced or have something to say or are rewatchable or whatever. Going to the theater these days is so expensive, so I want to focus on a little bit more what a person is able to see outside of the theater. And there's so much out there that seems to be just new that we tend to lose sight of all the other options that streaming services provide. Now, I only have two that are accessible to me at this time. I have Shudder and Tubi. So if you have any Shudder or Tubi movie recommendations for me that you want me to check out or whatever, leave a message in the comments. I would love to hear about that. There's so much out there that there are probably a lot of things that I don't know about. So the first movie that we're going to talk about is The Strange World of Coffin Joe. It's a Portuguese movie made in the 60s. And it is fully Portuguese with English subtitles. So if that is a hardship for you, that's maybe something to think about. It's an anthology, so there's three movies. And as far as I can understand it, they're not linked. They might exist in the same world, but I am still kind of dubious as to whether or not that's true. It seemed like three completely independent pictures. Now, I liked the way it was shot. I thought that it was crisp and clean. It's black and white. It definitely has a low production cost. I mean, you can see the painted backgrounds and there wasn't a lot of care put towards costuming and whatever. Like, you very much know that certain characters are in really bad wigs and stuff like that. But considering that it's from the 60s and considering that it probably had a low budget to begin with, you kind of give this movie a little bit of a pass, or at least I did. I enjoyed this movie for what it was. It was entertaining enough. Very different movies, very different kind of macabre imagery and whatnot. The last sequence is really the most depraved of them all. But yeah, I definitely, like, the darker themes of the movie definitely stood out. Apparently, Coffin Joe is a character that's in a few movies. Apparently, he's a gravedigger, and in this movie, he wasn't actually a character. He was more so kind of at the beginning to explain who he was, and then I think that was the last that we saw. So he wasn't even a narrator per se. He was just kind of the introducer, the MC of the movie. This is the first movie that I heard the song I'm gonna mispronounce this. Auld Lang Syne outside of the New Year's context, and it was in a funeral procession. So I had to look this up, but apparently it was a traditional song that was usually used in funeral or memorial events. And that kind of makes sense because when you think about it, it's only sung that I know, I've only heard it sung, at midnight on New Year's. And it kind of makes sense because you're saying goodbye and you're mourning the year that has passed. And that is why that song would be fitting. This might be old news for you. This is just something that I learned and I thought was fascinating. This movie got a 3 out of 5 on Shudder, and I can understand why. It was a fine movie. It wouldn't be scary necessarily by the standards of today, but if I think about back then, it probably was more impactful. I mean, there were situations that definitely would have made a person pause, especially when it comes to like older movies that have like a big tarantula coming to attack a city and stuff like that. This one seemed more depraved for sure. It's kind of a quieter horror movie, and I don't see it kind of as a party movie. I think that you really have to sit down and watch it because it has not all of it. There's the middle segment is one that doesn't have dialogue, but everything that does have dialogue, you have to read subtitles unless you know the language. I mean, I know a little bit of Portuguese, but I don't know enough to speak it for sure. So I had to rely quite a bit on the subtitles. So because of that, and because it's not a very action-packed film, especially in today's standards, I wouldn't recommend it as a movie. I could kind of see if you wanted to watch an older movie with friends that are wanting to sit and really digest a movie, seeing it. But I don't see it as very rewatchable. I don't see it as very fun. So in a party atmosphere, I don't think that I would put it on. It doesn't have a lot of visuals to have it as a background movie anyway. I do want to see the other movies that has this Coffin Joe character because he seems quite dark. He seems quite tricksy and sinister in his own right. So I kind of want to learn more about him. There are 3 movies. Apparently there's a trilogy that he is in that I am wanting to watch, and I'm going to look at my notes for the names of these because I know I'm gonna say them wrong. At Midnight, I'll Take Your Soul, which is apparently Brazil's first horror movie. I have to look into that more to say if that's true or not, but that's the way that it was promoted. This Night, I'll Possess Your Corpse, and Embodiment of Evil. There's some good Sunday morning viewing. I don't know how graphic these get, but certainly the names of these movies sound dark and a good time for me, but I'm sure that it'll turn a lot of people off. We'll see what kind of imagery and depravity are in these movies. But moving on to our next movie that I saw yesterday and reviewed, it is Climax. Now, I think this is a 2019 movie. Let me look at my notes. 2018. So it's 2018 French movie. It's subtitled again. Although I'm better at French than I am Portuguese, I did have to rely quite a bit on the subtitles for this movie. What did I watch? I mean, it was a fever dream. I won't say it was an enjoyable movie. I felt very uncomfortable when things really started rolling. and things were happening to different characters and whatnot. I thought that it was a very uncomfortable and awkward movie, but I think it was meant to be. So good job. I have to read more about who directed the film. Yeah, it was definitely effective. What this film is about, it's about a dance troupe that I guess are celebrating the success of them putting together choreography. And so they're partying. And I guess it's an old warehouse or an old school or something like that. And somebody spikes the punch with a hallucinogen. I think it's LSD. Now, I had to babysit quite a bit, or I shouldn't say quite a bit, a few times, people that were on LSD. And I'm happy to say that it wasn't like this film at all. In fact, I am happy to say that it was kind of boring. They were kind of experiencing what they were experiencing in the moment that they were experiencing it, and they were reacting to that. And because you're not in their brain and you don't know the context and you don't know whatever, all of a sudden stuff will happen. Like a person will get up and turn off the lights or whatever. And you're like, yeah, that makes all the sense. But yeah, like nothing like this movie. Nothing. Yeah, I want to say, yeah, I've been racking my brain and nothing even remotely touching this movie happened. Now, what did I like about this movie? I liked the long takes. I liked the drawn outness of this movie. I like how it kind of says, now watch. I'm going to hold you in this moment and you're going to watch and have impact of this moment. I loved the coloration. I loved the music. I loved how the music kind of goes in and out. I love how there seems to be events that you don't quite know what are happening in the events. So I liked that. I even liked the upside down and movement of the camera when different things were happening, even though that made me dizzy because I had all the lights off and I was watching my computer screen. Even though that made me dizzy, I did appreciate it for the effect that it had because this film was very disorienting. And I think part of that was the movements of the camera, that you weren't able to see some of the things clearly. You weren't able, or at least I wasn't, able to piece together what exactly was happening in each moment. So I think the movie did that very well. The dialogue wasn't that great, but when I researched it, it was mostly done improv. And I'm like, okay, for an improvisation, did I say that right? Anyway, you know what I mean. I have to give them props that is not an easy feat. And to have that kind of dialogue in a situation that is so dire in some cases is quite a feat. So I definitely appreciated that part. There's definitely a lot to like about this movie. I mean, it did a lot of things very well and effectively. I wouldn't say it was enjoyable, though. As I said before, it was a very awkward movie for me to watch. It was very uncomfortable for me to watch. So I think the rewatchability of this movie is low. I don't really think that this is a party movie because I don't really think it was fun. But then again, you could have it as a background movie because it does have some nice imagery to it. It does have some funkiness in the camera movements and whatnot. And it does have neat music. So maybe as a background, and a person can come and sit and watch a part of the movie, take what they take out of it, and then go back to the party. I can kind of see that. So maybe it is kind of a party movie. Although like it's not a fun movie. I didn't find it fun by any means. But I can definitely see how maybe it would be a background thing that people point at and watch for a moment and then move on with their lives. I don't see myself watching this one again. I think both movies I don't see myself watching, but for very different reasons. I mean, for The Strange World of Coffin Joe, I don't see myself rewatching it because it's a quiet movie. It demands attention. And I didn't get a hell of a lot of payoff from investing that. It was interesting for what it was, but I kind of wouldn't rewatch it probably because of that. Climax, I probably wouldn't rewatch because it made me so uncomfortable, because of not necessarily the subject matter, because, you know, being around people that are on different drugs doesn't bother me. But kind of the film as a whole doesn't really lend itself to be a rewatch, in my opinion. I would recommend Climax, though, to people that... I don't know if I would recommend it for people that like the movie Suspiria. I mean, I saw parallels, definitely, to that. But I think that might have been because it's a dance troupe. I think it might have been the setup. Suspiria is kind of a fever dream as well. So I kind of see how the two are similar in that way. Suspiria has some really funky music. Now, if I was going to put Climax and The Strange World of Coffin Joe head to head, I would say that Climax was the better picture. Now, not that it was the more enjoyable out of the two. It was definitely an uncomfortable watch for me. It was a fever dream. Whereas the other one was a little more linear, I think. But Climax had a more artistic showing. It had more of a setup, more of an artistic way of actually filming. And so I had to give this movie more points for the fact that it had that. Coffin Joe really had a more static camera, more typical, look to it. Whereas the camera was almost living in Climax. The camera was kind of shifting in and out and going upside down and whatever. I don't know whose point of view it would be. I don't know if it was LSD's point of view, but it was interesting to kind of follow that and see what artistic value that brought, as well as the coloration, as well as whatever. Now, I have to give a little bit of grace here because The Strange World of Coffin Joe was black and white, so it wouldn't have been able to do that. But it would have been able to be a little bit more artistic as far as shadowing goes. So stuff like that would have been able to be done, even though obviously it's not in color. It would have been able to be a little bit more artistic that way. I keep talking about how Climax made me feel really uncomfortable, and that's interesting because it made me feel something. Coffin Joe really didn't make me feel a whole lot. It didn't make me feel disgusted. It didn't make me feel happy. It didn't make me feel much of anything. So the intensity of me feeling in Climax was a lot. So Like I said before, good job to the people that made that film. That, yeah, that is what films should do. Films should make you feel something, even if it's just, it made me entertained. It was a good time. Even if it's just that, I think that's a winner. So I think in that vein, Climax won as well. Now, The Strange World of Coffin Joe did have better dialogue. So I have to say that it wins there, as the other one definitely didn't. I mean, I have to give it a little bit of grace that it was improv, but The Strange World of Coffin Joe seems to have more of a point that it's going to. It's more direct, and the dialogue itself was in that vein as well. Now, as far as what the films were going for, I seem to think that Climax was trying to say something. I'm not really sure what the meaning was and what it was trying to get at, but I really feel that it was trying to do it. And I didn't get that from Coffin Joe. I kind of got a movie, just a movie. You take it or leave it, whatever. And because of that, I want to say that Climax seems a far more intentional movie. I don't think either of these movies is actually scary. I would say that Climax is more worrisome because that type of stuff can actually happen. But either of the movies that I watched, I was not scared. I was definitely concerned. I was definitely uncomfortable. I was definitely just watching. But yeah, I didn't feel at all that there was a jump scare or that I had anything to worry about or whatever. The realness of Climax and about the situation that kind of triggered everything is kind of a real situation. I've been at parties where definitely something like that has happened. So, although the aftermath wasn't anything like in this movie, this scenario can happen, and that is probably the closest to scary that this movie gets, is understanding that something like this can happen. So there you have it. Two movies that I watched in November. Climax is the winner for this one, but definitely if you have other recommendations, be sure to let me know in the comments. I would love to hear what else is on Tubi or Shudder. What do you think it should be pinned against? That's the other thing. I kind of like thinking about these movies together versus thinking about them solely as one movie to another movie. Have you seen these movies? What was your thought of these movies? Do you agree with my statements? Let me know. Movies are so subjective, so I love hearing other takes to these movies. In the meantime, until next time, take care of yourself. I will talk to you later.